Thank you to Paul and the BioInnovations Midwest team for having this entire, in particular, this great panel that I have the pleasure of hosting. So we are very excited to be between you and lunch. At least it's not happy hour, so hopefully above your growling stomachs, you'll be able to hear us, and we'll be able to provide some food for thought, perhaps, to get ready for the real food. So as was mentioned, my name is Amy Davis. I head up public affairs for Novonesis, global biotech company. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and so you'll see some of what we're going to focus on in this panel is based on the lens that I see things through, which is policy focus. So we're hoping to dig into that arena of how you get market access and market pull through some of the policy risks and opportunities that are out there. So I am going to take a few minutes at the beginning to do a Novonesis commercial. For those of you who maybe weren't at the keynote and saw my colleague Renee and his great panel give a keynote a little bit about biosolutions, I'm going to do a short version of it here. There's a slide missing. There we go. This exercise should be fairly easy for this audience, so I want you to think of some of your favorite things. Did some of you think about food, or maybe your favorite drink, maybe whiskey? Did you think of physical things, hobbies? Did you think of nature? How about the people in your life and their well-being? What do they all have in common? Again, I think this room knows acutely well, they have biology in common. As Renee said this morning, we are looking to welcome people into what we're calling the era of biosolutions, where we use biology to solve humanity's biggest challenges, and it changes how the world produces and consumes almost everything. As I mentioned, this panel today, our purpose is to focus in on the key drivers of how that happens and to focus on policy risks and opportunity. So again, just quickly, the commercial, who is Novonesis, may be familiar to some of you. We are a new merger of two big biotech companies in the land of Denmark, but we're both global companies. The legacy companies are Novozymes and Christian Hansen. So we formed together in the last year to create this new venture and this new company called Novonesis, which is really exciting. It's a pure play biotech company with unmatched scale up and production capacity all around the globe. We're number one. We're number one producers of enzymes, number one producer of cultures, and number one producers of probiotics. This is a map to show you where we are. So again, just to give you a little bit of a sense of why I'm here, why Novonesis is so interested and supportive of this great conference that's being put on. As I mentioned, headquartered out of Copenhagen, Denmark, but globally, we are all over the world, and in the U.S., we're headquartered right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and we've been there for more than 25 years. We have more than 10,000 employees, 40 R&D application centers, and 30 production sites across 4 different continents. But I want to talk about, mostly in this introduction, is, again, the setup for this policy panel. So it's the time for transformation, right? And what are the key indicators that we have for that? Consumers want more, right? We all know this. Food is about sensory and visual experiences. More than anything else, the taste, the texture, and the appearance need to be appealing. At the same time, more and more consumers are focusing on their health and well-being. It's reflected in a quest for less sugar, more fiber, higher protein, novel health benefits, and simpler labels. All of these things have policy implications in order to get some of those ingredients and claims to the market. Furthermore, food and beverages in particular need to be offered at accessible price points, and it needs to fit people's everyday lives where they spend less time on preparation and cooking and more time focusing on the things that they love, like the first slide that I showed you all. Additionally, the economy is challenging, right? I'm hoping that we're now kind of going to do the soft landing that the Fed has been talking about for a while, but it's still a challenge for people. It's still top of their mind. The economic and environmental situation has resulted in inflation. I used to say high inflation. I think I can still say inflation securely, so that's something that's a concern. There's uncertainty around the world, and there are still increasing energy prices. That puts the focus on cost and productivity efficiency. We heard a lot about that, I think, in the last the panel before and the speaker before. And then I think what we're going to talk about some here is that regulations are also intensifying, right? As consumers' needs and desires are changing, the regulators are trying to keep up with that, and so are legislators. So regulatory requirements demand a high focus on consumer safety and health and sustainability. Labels need to comply with regulatory requirements, and then you need to comply with food safety regulations. So the key question in the food and beverage space, we believe, is how can we feed a growing population while meeting consumer demands, overcoming economic challenges, and regulatory requirements? And I think it all starts with understanding the building blocks of nature. So without microbes, we heard this morning, there would be no life as we know it on this planet. They transform our world with the enzymes that they create, from the tiniest bacteria and insects to the largest trees, animals, and humans. One thing that binds us all together is as living organisms and biology. So we like to talk about leveraging nature's own bioengineers is essential to the world functioning. I'm going to skip forward to this one because it just gives you a breadth of the application areas. I spent a lot of my time talking to politicians and people who are influential to politicians. And one of the challenges, I think, with this space is that the applications are almost endless. And so making sure that you are giving real-world examples while at the same time describing the breadth of the technology can be a challenge. But that is our challenge. That's our collective challenge, is finding the things that resonate with the audiences that you're talking to, whether they're investors or economic development folks, other companies that you want to partner with, or certainly policymakers. It is talking about the breadth of this technology and the impact that it can have on the world. So now leading into the panel discussion, I think what we want to talk about is the reality that the U.S. has a real leadership and competitive leverage in the world when it comes to this. We are, as I mentioned, a global company. I have counterparts that do public affairs all around the world. We have a lot of conversations about what motivates our governments, which ones of our governments think that this is a real economic opportunity for their particular nation and be an exporter to the world. And I think we're all probably biased thinking that our region is the one that has the competitive edge, but I think the U.S. Has a clear case to make in that regard. We're not here in Nebraska, my home state, by the way, so go Big Red, by mistake. You all are a shining example of why the U.S. is so on the top as far as global competitiveness for this area. But there are areas where we have a competitive edge, but also have some challenges. And those are the four that you kind of see listed here, where the interests from policymakers really lie, but that there are policy, market access, and market pull risks and opportunities that I think that we should be paying attention to, that the panel will speak to today. Ag feedstocks, manufacturing, national security, and obviously geopolitical competition, as we mentioned before. So let's get to the panel. Key drivers of U.S. leadership and competitiveness. That's what we're going to talk about today. I think what our main message to the audience today, in summary, is to not forget about policy when it comes to how to go to commercial scale, get to your customers, get through the valley of death, make sure that you're continually investing in R&D. There is a lot of policy opportunity out there to help you do those things. There are also some risks out there. So we want to talk specifically about those. So I'm going to take this moment now to introduce this wonderful panel that we have together with us today. So we have Jill Zullo, who is the Senior Executive Vice President and COO of BioMADE. We have Betsy Dirksen Londrigan, who is the Administrator of Rural Business Cooperative Services at USDA. And we have Casey Belitz, who you heard from earlier, is the Director of the Nebraska Department of Economic Development. So I'm going to start in on some questions for the panel, challenge them a bit. I am going to direct it to a panelist, but we agreed that we would have an open format and that they could help each other and comment on each other's questions. So hopefully we'll have a really interesting and robust conversation. I'm going to start with you, Betsy, here. And if you could, take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself a little bit further in the part of USDA that you represent. And then my first question to the group, starting with Betsy, is what do you see as the key drivers in the marketplace, either from the CPGs that you work with and other offtake companies, or directly from consumers, particularly in the bio-based products, ingredients, and materials space?
Thank you. So I'm the administrator for Rural Business and Cooperative Service, which is in the Rural Development Mission Area in U.S. Department of Agriculture. So everything business-related, renewable energy systems that are not utility scale, but we have a host of grant and loan programs to support businesses that either are located in or serving or using rural areas for production. I think for key drivers, suitability, form, function are all some of the key drivers, but ultimately it's cost in obtaining feedstock, production, and ultimately what consumers are willing to pay. And one of the things, and why they're willing to pay that. One of the programs that we have at Rural Business Services is a voluntary labeling program called the BioPreferred label. So what that is it is just like when you go to the store and you see the USDA organics label. The BioPreferred label is an indicator of bio-based product. And so it's a voluntary label that companies can come to us, go through. It's a very easy certification process. And what that does is a couple of things. On the supply side, it gives the businesses the ability to separate themselves from a crowded field and show consumers who are looking for it and are willing to pay for bio-based products that their product qualifies. It also enters that product into a preferred sort of category within federal procurement. There are statutory requirements for federal agencies to purchase bio-based products. They look at the BioPreferred label in our product catalog for those purchases. And so then we're hoping to also create demand. And it's one way that we can bring the power of the federal government to help create demand.
Can I build?
Yes, please, Jill.
So I like to kind of mix it up as we're up here. So I love what you said about that. And if we think about what are those industries where it is more important to be in the BioPreferred or to be labeled, that consumers are really trying to take that pull. And so maybe I should introduce myself first. So Jill Zullo, new to BioMADE about 3 weeks in. So I have a tremendous amount of history that I'll represent here. Deep knowledge on that. But I am a longtime sort of person of this space with about 29 years at Cargill, which I ended in January. So have been in this space for a while. And what we did I'll speak now with my Cargill, old Cargill hat on, and what we did is really try to understand what are those industries that are feeling the pain of not being renewable, or that really have consumers that are saying, hey, I want a different sort of experience here. And when we did that work, we really found that apparel, there's a really big driver in apparel. It's in a tough spot with fast fashion. Another big driver is certainly in packaging. So how do you get packaging in some way, shape, or form renewable? And I love you mentioned the challenge of the price. And that's some of the challenge that we have to figure out. How do we become far more competitive? And I don't mean competitive as parity. I mean it's competitive because we have unique offerings for bio-based materials. And so, thinking about BioPreferred or other things, that can really help increase that demand and increase that drive.
I'll add this frame to what both have said, and it comes actually from our governor. Jim Pillen is a pork producer, and one of the things that he said to me a long time ago, which has stuck with me, is that the market is never wrong. So in his perspective, whatever the price is for a pig that day, that's the price. He doesn't get to say it's wrong. Mm-hmm. The market's right. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Whatever the consumers decide they're willing to pay is what the consumers are willing to pay. And that is the driver. long-term, sustainably, the only thing that really drives this is the free market. And that means what the market says, what the consumer says, that's the answer.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to make, Casey. And I had an experience not that long ago where we were at an industry meeting at the White House and talking about biomanufacturing and some of the drivers. And it was a very diverse group that were there from the industry side. And we were having this conversation about price and marketing and how those, you know, what the consumers were looking for when they went to the store, what industries were really most interested in bio-based manufacturing materials. And there was a point made that I thought was particularly smart and along the lines of what the governor, it sounds like, is saying, which is the price driver is really what is going to show the offtake companies also what the value is for them, right? And so I think there are multiple drivers. Certainly sustainability, certain people want different ingredients going into their products, but I do think that the price driver and then that translating to value to the offtake who's actually taking those ingredients and putting it in their final product that ultimately is going to the consumer, I think is one that should not be forgotten. So let me go to the next question, which we'll go back to Jill, and talk about gaps. Gaps in the, not just the drivers that we see, but if we understand the drivers, then what are the gaps that we still see in the marketplace? So are there gaps in the feedstock supply chain or in production capacity? Some of the things that we've talked about already, but certainly policy and regulation have an impact on this. All three of you are connected in some way, shape, or form to government interest in this sector. So Jill, could you start us off talking about some gaps?
Sure, and we just heard one from Synonym, right? So there is this gap, certainly in a capacity. When you're driving out new technology, you need to be able to scale it up, you know, sort of in a logical manner. And what we found is there is this gap of there's many smaller tanks up to maybe like 1,000 or so liters, and then, you know, when you get to your large production, you know, that's another thing, but it's how do we bridge from those? And that's one of the big initiatives that we're working on at BioMADE, is to be able to provide that and provide it at a price that people can pilot for long enough to really prove out their technology, right? We do other things in terms of investing in innovation and building out workforce, but all of those things allow us to go from the start of an idea and concept out into a product. Mm-hmm. Now, if we think about what are the gaps that we see maybe from a regulatory or a policy perspective, what's really interesting is that when you think about who we're sort of competing against and who's lobbying against us, it's an industry that is very, very well cohesive, right, and very strong, and has years and years of profits and years of technologies that they can defend themselves with, and they can continue to offer a lower price. So how do we start to get on the same footing as some of these petro-based companies, right? So I don't know if anybody saw Doug's talk earlier, but you know what we're competing with is a really well-oiled machine that has capital that's been invested, you know, hundreds of years ago, as well as then perfected in a technology, so really low cost. So how do we start to build a whole new industry to compete with that? We need some more common voices and really need to articulate how can we create some of these incentives in a wide variety of ways that helps reduce part of our cost burden. And that's a challenge, but I really see that as being a gap and missing. We've had some great investments, especially in BioMADE from the Department of Defense, to help us be able to put out those capabilities that are needed, but how do we go across that entire value chain to really help us with some of those cost challenges?
Yeah, and I'll pipe in here from USDA perspective. So we also know that, I mean, we've got feedstock, right? We've got it in lots of ways, in lots of places, and it's incredibly exciting that it's all in rural communities. But we do have an education gap, and some of that comes with our farmers and with our growers, because they're not going to produce crops unless they know they're going to be profitable. So how do we help get from here to there? It used to be the biomass crop assistance program, but there's, as the industry is trying to move and start, ultimately, we need to make sure that the farmers, the growers are all educated on board, and that there is some assurance for them, whether that's through crop insurance, whether that's through another assistance program, that as they are willing to augment or pivot, right, those are going to be really important, that type of program and policy, making sure that that's in place. And so some of our sister agencies at USDA are, they're working on those things. From our perspective in rural business, we do have grant and loan programs available to help businesses get from here to there. We also recognize the valley of death as an issue, and are trying to have these conversations. We're having them with BioMADE. We're trying to also have them with Department of Energy and some of the other sort of players in that space, to make sure that our programs are aligning with what they are also trying to achieve. And we're not being precious about it, right? I mean, we know it's all hands on deck. So if our program is not the right fit, no problem. Let me introduce you over here. So we are trying to do it in that way too.
And what I would add is, whether it's education or awareness, I think there's an awareness gap, which really, from an economic development perspective, plays out in lots of ways. And specifically, I'm talking about an awareness of the scope of this opportunity. If you don't understand as a grower or as a community or whomever the scope of this opportunity, you may let it pass. And I really do think that plays out in a lot of ways. We're seeing it locally, I think, certainly as an industry. So all of us have a role to play there in just helping our neighbors or our colleagues, whatever, understand the scope of this opportunity and the things that are going to have to happen for us to take advantage of that. Going back to, again, the free market, we got to make a dollars and cents case that these investments are worth making.
Yeah. I love this chain, and I'm particularly passionate about it as I work in Washington with some of the industry areas that you all are so familiar with. And one of the things that is starting to really crystallize for me, both in what Jill and Betsy were both saying, we have a competitive industry out there that we are trying to level ourselves with, but then also broaden the tent as to what voices should be joining our voices, because they have something in it also. So if you look at this list of industries, right, that this technology touches, what we've been trying to do is reach out to organizations in Washington for the manufacturers, for the food and beverage industry, for the packaging industry, because you may have people, especially in Washington, who are representing those industries who have real either ingredient, packaging, or supply chain issues that they are really trying to solve, either through policy or in other ways, and they're not aware that biotechnology can be a solution for them. And so they may either just not know that they should care about biotech policy and regulation, or they think somehow that they should be against advocating for further biotech solutions. And so I love this education campaign idea and this being a gap, because I think we're ripe for having so many more voices to join our choir for this, if we can just reach out a little bit more and, again, have this conversation and this narrative about the true benefits that biotechnology can bring to supply chains and ingredients and packaging and things like that. So I appreciate that very much, panel. Casey, this one's for you. As I mentioned, and several others have as well, there's a reason why we are here in Nebraska. Thank you for having us. The bioeconomy is flourishing here. I know that you at the department have best practices to share with us. So I want you to dig a little bit deeper on what gaps you've seen most beneficially filled here in Nebraska. You obviously have an amazing community and an amazing ag community in particular to help make this happen. But I wanted to see if you could fill in a little bit about what you all have seen over the years and how you've addressed some of those.
I'll go back to the one I just mentioned, and that is the awareness gap. And we're not there yet. I would never pretend that the work is done, right? But what Governor Pillen has done, I think, by establishing the governor's bioeconomy initiative, is really bring a focus to that brand, to this initiative, to this issue. And all of that helps us first address the awareness gap, which we believe then helps you work on all of the others along the way. Because once you are aware of, from a state economic development perspective or community perspective, once you're aware of the scope of this opportunity, then you're ready to dig in and go to work. And if it's electrical capacity or workforce capacity or public policy at the local level, whatever that might be, then you're ready to go do that work. We've always had the feedstocks, right? We know that, whatever it might be, in terms of the starting point of those feedstocks, we certainly have that. But there are other steps in the chain, and those other steps in the chain take some work, and they take some policy, and they take some attitudinal changes as well, beyond policy, just changing attitudes. So really, I think the first important gap that we're making progress toward filling is the awareness gap. Some of the others we kind of already had in place in terms of the feedstocks, in terms of water, in terms of clean air, all those other things. We can produce a really climate-friendly product here. But to turn that into the next thing, it takes some of these other attitudinal and policy and just business market cases to be put in place too. Attitude, awareness, first step. We're making progress on the others.
Well, that's putting it mildly, and I would assume it steamrolls a bit for you as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah,
The more
momentum.
business and
Yes.
people involved in the business you have, the more awareness you get in the community, and that drives.
Success breeds success.
There you go. There you go. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. Jill and Betsy, anything to add about that? About if you had a magic wand and you could get anything accomplished or in place to really push biomanufacturing in the United States to commercial scale on a broader level?
I'll pipe in because while you're thinking, I'll pipe in because I've got a couple. One would be I think maybe the first one would just be I love our bio-preferred programs so much. It has so many positives to it. I wish that if I could wave my magic wand, we would have NAICS codes for bio-based products. And we are working on that. It doesn't come up until 2027, but if we get that done immediately, like that's what my wand would do. And then the other thing my wand would do would be to encourage all of the, all of the folks who are kind of entering this field from the business side, is to look at the innovation happening at the land-grant universities, because the place-based innovation is incredible. And feedstock looks so different from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign to Alabama, to the University of Idaho. And these are all opportunities. And what we know from our biomass supply chain report is that in the United States, we got the feedstock. These are in rural communities. We've got incredible, there's nobody who knows their feedstock like the farmers, right, and the growers. Like, they know it better than anybody. And that innovation that is happening at these land-grant universities is all based, around where they live, and it involves the farmers and the growers who are there in that place. And so I would just say that there's incredible opportunities all over the United States.
And then I would add, it's a little bit different, in fact, different than what I just said before, but I would love to see the chemical companies here.
Yeah.
I would love to see the petrochemical companies here, because doing this in their absence, I think is a challenge. And it's been a challenge my whole 30-plus year career, right? So how do we get them to the table? How do we think different about partnership? How do we understand what we're each good at, because we are each good at certain things, and maybe the blend together is really the way to head. And I know it's one of those that's tough, because can you be a little bit sustainable? I don't know. But how do you figure out, how do you not let perfect be the enemy of good, and have us start partnering in a new and different way?
And I want to build on one of the items that Betsy just talked about there too. That tech transfer thing is key, and it's one of the places where policy clearly could play in. What are we doing at the federal level or state level to incentivize that tech transfer in this space specifically? What's the next renewable fuels standard in this space that provides us the transition period to really build out this new industry, much as you were talking about? And I would say it should drive toward free market demand, because that's the only sustainable future for any industry. But there are things, federal tax credits, state programs, whatever, that clearly can help us make that transition today that really could move the needle.
Yeah, very good points. We are almost at the end of our time. I have a call to action for the audience. I'm going to ask the panel if you have any last words or a call to action you'd like to give to the audience.
I'll start by saying utilize the tools that are available. And what I mean by that is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have invested an extraordinary, historic amount of funding in the bioeconomy space. And it's not all at USDA. It is at Department of Energy, it is at EPA, it is at Department of Defense, it is at Treasury. So there are so many tools available to you for funding, everything from R&D to workforce development. It is there, and I'm encouraging you to look at what is out there for you, because there's so many opportunities.
And I'm going to say no one can do this alone. So think about who to partner, how to partner. I'll put a little pitch in for BioMADE, right? So we're a public-private sort of partnership, if you will. And a big part of what we're trying to do is convene different folks together that you wouldn't have necessarily thought, oh, that's who I actually need to talk to. So really leaning in and thinking about partnership and leveraging then each other's skills to drive faster.
Simply put, I would say that the call to action is it's time to get to work. Nebraska's bioeconomy and the nation's bioeconomy, probably the most significant rural economic development opportunity of our lifetimes.
Absolutely,
I would say without question. But it will not happen without local policymakers, state, federal, et cetera, understanding that, which means our neighbors have to understand it, right? Mm-hmm. And so spread the gospel. Help people understand the scope of this opportunity, not just what it's going to mean for company A or B or whatever, but for the farmers, yes. For rural economies. Help people understand the scope of this opportunity, and that's something every one of us in this room can do to truly move the needle.
Yes, I could not agree more with all three of you. I think it's like you read my mind when I made this call to action slide, but yes, I think what I would call to the audience is similar, right? The time is now. More is needed. A unified voice helps all of your local and federal officials really move the needle for an industry. If they hear different messages from different parts of the industry, that makes it more difficult for them. So the more we can unite and pull together and speak with one voice and talk about the benefits and share this narrative, I think the more successful that we will be. And I love Betsy's call to really utilize the tools that are out there. I would agree with you. It's been a historic couple of years for the bioeconomy. And so I'm sure myself and anyone on this panel would love to talk with you more about it. So please join me in thanking the panel once again, and thank you again for joining us.